This is Ryan Pierce, host of Completely Serious. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
This is Julianne Condia, host of Rewritten here on Public House Media. Thank you so much for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you are done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my show, Rewritten, where we will talk about you having limitless potential and can rewrite your story at any time. No matter your background, your past, or current situation, you can have the type of life you crave. A new show comes out every single Monday. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode of Rewritten. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Hello everyone, welcome to How to Write Good. I'm your host Daniel Poppy. You can find out more about me at danielpoppy.com. This show is brought to you by Public House Media. You can check them out on Facebook or you can check them out at thephmedia.com. So this is coming out. This is the first week of October, so happy October everyone. This show might be a little shorter. I'm not feeling so well, and we'll see. We'll see if I get into it. All right, so we are going to start with our word of the week, and we are talking about language this week, and our word of the week is lingua franca, which I know is two words, but it's a term, okay? So lingua franca literally means the Frankish tongue, okay? So it's from Italian. It's an Italian word. It's not French. It's not Latin, unless you want to say Italian is a type of Latin. So what it is, it's a stripped down Italian, and it has Spanish in it. It has French. It has Greek. It has Arabic. It has Turkish, and it actually it was actually used as a form of communication in, I believe you call it the Levant, in like the Middle East, and it dates back to the Crusades. So it initially was kind of like a form of Italian. But now English is the lingua franca, so it's the language that is shared among many other people groups, and they use it to communicate. So I think that's really interesting. I just think it's an interesting term, and I think the idea of a lingua franca is an interesting thing. I don't know why, actually. I just do. We're going to continue on to our accidental essence now, and for the accidental essence, we're going to be doing something a little differently the next 14 weeks. Now, this podcast, as everybody who's listening knows, because I say it over and over again. So it's called How to Write Good, and it is more philosophical. I'm never trying to give you specific rules for how to write, which makes what I'm doing for the next 14 weeks ironic to a certain degree. So the point of this is every time I ran into rules for writing, I would run into things like there's a rule out there. I can't remember which author it is. But the author gave the rule, hey, never use semicolons. It was Vonnegut. That's who it is. And then there was another author who's like, never use adverbs. I actually think Stephen King says don't use adverbs. And there's all these different rules. There's another one, I can't remember. There's specific words that authors don't like. And because the authors don't like the words, they put it in their rules for things you shouldn't do, even though it's a matter of personal taste, right? So I've actually come up with writing rules. And these rules are a little different because they don't try to make you write differently. They don't try to give you really tiny little prescriptions. Like, they're not like, hey, don't use adverbs. Hey, don't use the word very. I believe that Mark Twain didn't like the use of the word very. So Mark Twain, he said, he has a quote, and I'm sure a lot of people know it, where he says, every time you want to use the word very, use the word, I don't even know if I can say it. Use the word damn. I'm sorry, use that word, and when your editor goes through it, your editor will get rid of it, and your problem will be taken care of because he thought you shouldn't use the word very. And there's all these different types of rules authors put up. And some of them are really useless, honestly, because they contradict one another in a lot of different ways. So I'm going to be presenting my 14 rules for writing. And what I'm trying to do with these 14 rules, I'm not trying to change how somebody writes. I'm not trying to make, if you write flowery, if you have floral type writing, I'm not trying to change that. If you write like Shakespeare, I'm not trying to change that. If you write in a way that I think is extremely boring, but you think it's really interesting. I'm not trying to change that. What I'm trying to do, my main goal for writing is always clarity, understanding for other people. When I write, I try to write in a way that people are going to enjoy and that people are going to understand when I write it. If it catches you and brings you in with it, the better. But simple writing, if you're just trying to convey an idea and that's all you're trying to do and you're very utilitarian about it, I'm okay with that as well. So we're going to be doing that. I'm going to be having 14, and I'm going to be starting with the most important one first, because I'm going to be referencing back to them. And I think that it's important to have the most important one first so that when I refer back to it, people remember it. Now, I kind of block these together. So the first and second ones, the number 1 and 2 are very, very close. I don't know which one is first. Number 3, 4, and 5 are very, very close. Numbers 6, 7, and 8 are very, very close. And what is in importance. Numbers 9 and 10 are also, and 11 and 12 as well, and 13 and 14. So there's ones that you may say, well, I think this one is more important than that one. And it might be the case that I actually couldn't make a decision, so I kind of block them together. I'm not going to be presenting them together. I'm going to be presenting them in the order I think they fit, but some I know are more important than others, and I'll explain why. But the first rule for writing is writing follows spoken language, okay? So writing is after the tradition of oral storytelling, or telling things with your mouth, right? Because that's how we started. Spoken language came before writing, I think. Maybe not. Not sure about that. No. So spoken language came before writing, and writing is mimicking that in a way. Now, you might be like, well, I can speak really, really well, but I can't write to save my life, which might be the case, okay? So what do we do with this? First of all, I want to explain why I think it's the case that writing follows after spoken language. And I think these rules, I'll give you caveats. I'll tell you when I don't think it applies to all situations. I have certain rules that apply to fiction writing, but I think these rules apply to people. I think these rules apply to writing generally, so you can apply them across the board. And that's my issue. That's my issue with most rules that are given, because it's like, well, that doesn't apply across the board. And you'll see that I give a lot more leeway in what I do than other authors, and I'm not as judgmental about what you do with your writing. So the first one is writing follows spoken language. Now, when you write, first of all, any type of writing is embedded in the language it is in. Every language has its own culture, let's just call it that. Every language has its own way of doing things. Every language has its own rhythm. Every language has its own sense. For example, let's go to this. First, we can look at languages, and we can look at to see how different languages function. We can actually take two languages that are pretty far apart. So we can take English, because we're speaking English right now, and maybe there's a Spanish speaker who is listening to this. I don't know why you're listening to this if you don't understand. But if we look at English, which is a European language, and we look at Chinese. Now, Chinese, if you're at all familiar with that, is tonal. So you actually have similar sounds, but they have different tones. And I don't know Chinese, so I can't give you a specific example, but it goes up and down much more from what I understand. Now, that sounds much different than any East Asian languages sound much different than any European languages that you hear. Okay, so their writing, actually one thing that's part of that language, to go off with it, I believe that they don't have plurals. Okay, so Chinese, and maybe it's only specific types of Chinese don't have plurals. So what happens is instead of saying two dogs, you say two dog, or three dog, or four horse, etc., and so on. So that is going to change how you approach the language, and that's going to change how you approach speaking the language, right? Chinese, because it's tonal, because it's developed over time to go through that. Actually, when you listen to Chinese, when you listen to Japanese, and you listen to Korean and all these other languages that are in that East Asian language family, I'm not sure all the ones that fit, it still has a rhythm, it still sounds a specific way, but I think that what you kind of understand what is unique about it when it's when they're speaking another language. So you have someone who speaks Chinese and they speak English, and you hear the accent and you hear those idiosyncrasies of Chinese in English, and you're like, that doesn't sound right to the English mind. That doesn't really fit. In the same way, English has its own way of doing things. Now, let's get kind of a little closer to home in terms of language groups. If we look at English and we look at it in relation to Italian, so these are closer. So Chinese is in a completely different language group, and I've talked about English and Italian, and the languages of Europe are generally in the Proto-Indo-European language group. So Italian is in that group, and English is in that group. So they're going to sound more similar. But when you listen to Italian, it's much more rhythmic. It's much bouncier. Actually, if you do the stereotypical Italian accent, it's like, oh, I'm going to go to the store, and I can't do it. I'm not an accent person, but it's similar. If you look at that and you hear it in English, you hear the idiosyncrasies of how that language works, and in some cases, that language has colored the English language in the United States, especially if you watch any mobster movies. That's a stereotyping of that coming into English. Okay, so you kind of see how these languages are different than each other, and whatever language you're speaking in, though, if we get a little closer between English and German, you still hear a difference, but they're more similar. Now, the thing that's interesting about English, which makes it unique, which I've mentioned in the past, is English it borrows from other languages. It borrows a lot of French in general, because the French took over England for a while and the English still kept their language. So we have a lot of French influences to English, and I'm sure there's certain things in English and certain ways we speak that sound that way, but German is our closer cousin. And if you look at Frisian, which is in the Netherlands, if you've ever heard of Frisia, it's at the very northern tip of the Netherlands. I believe it's in the Netherlands, is a place where there's this saying, it's butter, bread, and green cheese is good English and good Fries, because you say the two in the exact same way. So that's going to be something that sounds even more similar, closer to English, and it's going to have similar rhythms. But at the same time, English is smoother. Let's go back to German for a second. English is smoother than German. German is also different than English, because you can take however many words you want, because Germans are insane, and you can jam them together. So you can make words that are as long as you want, because you're capable of jamming as many words together to make something up. Germans have done this in smaller ways, for example, by making the word airplane, because airplane is a fairly new word. The word in German for airplane is Flugzeug, which is terrific because it means fly thing. There's another word, I can't remember what it is, but I believe it's hit thing. I can't remember what maybe it's a baseball bat, I'm not sure. Maybe it's a hammer. I'm not sure which word literally translates to hit thing in English, but that's what it is. But if you just listen to other languages, and if you listen to what's going on, each language has its own way of doing things. And we're not going to get into why it has its own way of doing things, but this rule that I have applies across the board to every language, okay? For writing. Writing follows spoken language. In a more philosophical sense, what that means is that writing comes from our language. Writing follows after the pattern of our language. Here's something really interesting. So there's a lot of grammatical rules. When you write, especially when you're writing something informal, you could follow those grammar rules to the letter, right? But the language itself might not agree with the grammar rules. For example, people in English use prepositions at the end of a sentence. They use prepositions at the end of the sentence, and people understand what it is, and they use prepositions at the end of the sentence without thinking. Now, if that happens so much in English, and there's never really any confusion about it, should it be a grammar rule? Now, I would argue that it shouldn't. You should follow after what the language is doing, and the language does change after a while. Another thing, now I had something else in my head. There's other things within speech, there's other things within grammar that may not actually follow the rules exactly. That may not actually follow the language, and the language rules. Grammar does not rule. The language rules. Spoken language rules. Grammar came after spoken language because we could not have grammar without writing. All right, grammar is to serve the writing. Grammar is Grammar is to serve what's being said. What's being said does not serve the grammar. Does that make sense? All right, so that's why writing follows after spoken language. And you may be thinking, well, this isn't really helpful, okay? This isn't really helpful. So what I know that writing follows after spoken language. Maybe you agree with me completely. Maybe you're thinking, yeah, that makes a lot of sense that spoken language came first. Therefore, I should look to spoken language to help me develop my writing itself. And maybe you're thinking grammar should also follow how we speak because that's what comes first as well. You're just on board with what I'm saying, but you're like, well, Dan, what the heck is going on? How is this going to help me? One thing you can do since spoken language comes first, since that is where writing comes from. When you write, you can certainly write your first draft in without talking. But at some point when you're writing, if you want to be better at writing, say you're not very good at writing, speak it out loud. If it doesn't sound good to your ear, it probably isn't good, okay? You're probably not going to be perfect. There's probably going to be some grammatical mistakes that are legitimate grammatical mistakes. Like they're actually things that should be in the English language. There's probably some things that you're going to run into that are incorrect. And especially if you're writing something formal, there's probably certainly going to be things you're going to run into that are incorrect. But what you should do is you should speak it out loud. You write it once, and then actually this is what I do with everything I write. The first time I write it without talking. I just write it out, and I don't worry about it. The second time I actually speak it out, I talk through every single word, and then I revise, and I talk through it again, and I talk through it again, and I talk through it again. And the reason why I do that is because I know that my aesthetic sense for the language is better than me just trying to think through it, because things sound differently in your head than when you speak them out loud. And actually, another thing you need to notice, especially if you're doing creative writing, is can you say things? Can you actually say those words together? Because if you can't say them together, then other people might not be able to say them together. Now, this is actually, so you might still be thinking, well, why are you presenting a rule? Because this podcast is about no rules and doing whatever you want. This actually caters to you. This rule caters to you because everybody talks differently. Everybody has their specific way of speaking, and I think that's awesome, and I think that there's writing is great, and if you actually try to develop that ear for your own way of speaking, you're going to have a very unique writing style that's all your own. You're going to probably develop your writing style more quickly than other people, and you're going to do it in a better way, and it's going to just flow better. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, well, I can't do that. I'm still not going to be able to write well, and I want you to think about this for a second. I know pretty much everybody you know. Almost everybody I know. Almost everybody I've met, barring people with very severe mental handicaps and really, really little kids, can speak. My nephew is 7. I think he's 6 years old. And he can speak in full sentences. And the really cool thing about that is that he's speaking in full sentences and they're flowing together and he's doing it without thought. Okay? So maybe you're in a situation where you're like, I can't write at all. I don't even know what to start, how to start. I don't even know where to start. I don't know what to do. You already have the first tool you need to start writing, and that's your mouth. So when you write, and if you don't know what to do, if you're not around people and you're not going to freak them out because it might freak them out, just try speaking. Speak the thing, write it down. Speak the thing, write it down. It's all right to say something out loud to hear what. If you don't need to speak every single word, if you're not sure about something, you can just you can still say it out loud to check with yourself, to check with your ears, because your ears are a little different. It passes through your brain differently. Okay. It passes through your brain differently. I think that when you think words, I'm not positive about this. I don't know this off the top of my head, and this is just something coming to my mind right now. When you think words, I believe your auditory cortex in your brain is stimulated. I believe it lights up when you do, but I don't believe it's the exact same thing. All right. I think it's a little different because, you hear that voice in your head, right? It's kind of like you're pretending you're hearing something. So yeah, so that's the first thing. That's the first rule that I want to present to you. And this was a little shorter and of a podcast, and I hope it's a useful rule. Like I said, when I came up with these rules, I did a lot of research to come up with the rules. I went through all these different things that all these other writers said, and I took out all these ones that weren't applicable to actual writing, or the actual act of writing. So that in certain cases, there are more matters of style, and they were certainly able to be changed easily. So one of the rules that I ran into was using adverbs. Well, I already told you that, but it was very specific adverbs. Like never say someone said excellently, or never use adverbs next to the word said. So the character is never able to say things in any way except in ways that you describe later on. Now, for me, I always thought, well, the tools are there. Why am I not using them? And that really bugs me, because when I'm told I can't do something, I want to do something with it. Okay. So that is all I'm going to have for today for this episode. I'm actually going to jump into our logical fallacy of the week, and then I'm going to go. So it's a little shorter. I'm not feeling so well, but you still got it. You still got it. So here we go with the logical fallacy of the week. Our fallacy of the week is fallacy of the many questions. So it's also known as the complex question, or fallacy of presuppositions, or a loaded question. And what this fallacy is a person, with the question that is asked presupposes something that isn't proven by the questioner. For example, I think this would be kind of like a leading question. So if someone was like, oh yeah, it was really, really nice out today, wasn't it? Now, I don't know why you're having an argument about it being nice out, but you could certainly do this in other cases. I believe that the question, have you stopped beating your wife yet, would fit into this. That's a classic question that people know of, where it's like, oh, you ask, oh, have you stopped beating your wife? And if the person doesn't beat his wife, and he says no, that means he has beat his wife in the past. And if he says yes, if he says no, he's still beating his wife, excuse me. And if he says yes, that means he has beat his wife in the past. So it's like cornering the person. And I believe this would fit under there, but any type of question that is, that limits what someone can answer with is a fallacy of many questions, or it's the loaded question fallacy. This actually, I think, happens to teachers a lot. I think this happens in maybe not. I think this happens with teachers a lot in to a certain degree, but of course they're not having an argument with their students. But I think it happens just presenting ideas a lot, where you give a question, and you give a question in a way that it only can be answered. I wonder if that would fit into there as well. I'm sure there is a logical fallacy that kind of pushes people into a specific frame of ideas. This is similar to that, but that's our logical fallacy of this week. As always, my name is Daniel Poppy. You can check me out on my website, danielpoppy.com. You can also follow me or How to Write Good on Twitter. You can follow How to Write Good on Facebook, or myself. You can follow me on Instagram as well. I've got some stuff going on there. And if you haven't picked up a copy of my book yet, certainly go and do that. You can check it out. You can get it on Amazon. It's pretty cheap. I think you'll like it. If you do, leave a review, because that's the biggest way you can help me, the biggest way you can help any indie author, actually. That's what you should do. So if you ever read an indie author, if you like the book, leave a review, because that'll just push more people to the indie author. Okay, it's a little shorter this week. I'm not feeling the best. I'll just make the excuse. So yeah, as always, my name is Daniel Poppy, and this is How to Write Good. Have a good rest of your week.